Welcome. This is Sabrina Monarch of monarchastrology.com, bringing you the astrology forecast for August 19th to August 25th, 2020. Welcome back. If you are a regular and if you're new here, stick around for a more enchanting perspective of the celestial energies this week. I come to astrology with a background as a poet, and I'm also clairvoyant. And so I also have like a kind of unique vernacular or vocabulary. So you may find that the words that I'm speaking take you to places, bring up images or feelings, or help you make connections in your mind. So I hope that you can really just enjoy this forecast and feel into what it brings up for you and how it opens up some portals to hidden opportunities this week and name some of the subtle dynamics that you may be feeling. So if you are new here, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when new videos come out. Please like this video and also comment. Let me know how you're doing and what you resonate with in this forecast. You can also sign up for my mailing list, and the link is below, to get an article about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020, which is a background transit that we're all very much feeling. It was exact on January 12th, but it is really like the zeitgeist when we talk about historic contractions or mass global crisis. Like, that is a Saturn-Pluto kind of energy. And yet, all of what I share astrologically, I really aim to empower you and give you ideas for how to participate with the transits. So Saturn-Pluto is also a lot about moral transformation and leveling up, and maybe like even really devoting yourself to some kind of project or something that feels like work, but you kind of forge yourself and become more empowered or more in your authority in the process. So check that out. If you sign up for my mailing list, you also get notifications about upcoming courses that I teach. I teach an evolutionary astrology intensive, and you'll get these weekly forecasts to your inbox as well, which are written. I send the written version to my mailing list. They're written at monarchastrology.com, and I branched out to YouTube to share a video version for you all. And one last thing, follow me on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch. I love connecting with you there. So I'm going to share my screen and share some slides that I have with you for the week ahead. Leo season comes to a close this week. The Sun and Mercury enter Virgo. Mars in Aries squares Saturn in Capricorn, and Venus in Cancer opposes Jupiter in Capricorn. We can think of Virgo as a devotional energy, among other things. Virgo is associated with service too. Virgo also corresponds with anxiety, criticism, crisis, not feeling like we're enough, focusing on what's wrong. We can all have a better experience of Virgo's energy when we decide conscientiously what we want to focus on. And not only what we want to focus on, but what we are willing to return to again and again in our focus. This last week, I happened to pick up a book called Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hanson. And this book delves into the neuroscience and some pragmatic techniques around rewiring the brain for happiness. And it's been an interesting read because some of these things are things that I've also done, kind of like in a play, like theoretical, like I know this is going to work, I'm going to rewire my brain. And so reading this and knowing that there's actual brain science, neuroscience behind it is really cool to feel confirmed in that way. But I actively like reprogrammed my brain away from depression some years back. And I like to do things like do visualization practices where I just give myself like a vitamin of chemicals that come from like fantasy imagery. Like you might take a vitamin or something to boost you. You can do that with how you consciously rewire your brain. So one of the things that Hanson talks about is this process of taking in the good and making a point to sit with the positive moments that occur throughout the day for like 15 seconds or more, that you notice them, that you take them in and that you absorb them instead of just letting them pass by. Because some of these moments that are really good, they might just pass us by because we actually have evolved as a species that our brain our brains like more naturally have structures in them to fixate on what's wrong or what's negative so that we can survive. Like we can scan the environment for threat, we can remember danger, and we can be sure to be, vigilant and make sure that nothing bad happens. So that chemistry or like that wiring, those neural networks are already there. And if over time, if we really allow ourselves to fixate on the negative, we can become increasingly negative and reactive. Likewise, if we make a practice around happiness and creating some new neural pathways around happiness, then we'll accrue the harvest of that over time as well. So how does Virgo play into this, and why am I talking about this? Virgo has two basic ways of accomplishing its agenda of creating order or organization. One is that it can scan for imperfection and fix problems, or Virgo can align with a chosen value and align reality around that. So for example, we could engage this way of interacting with ourselves where we are ruthlessly scanning ourselves for imperfection, picking at ourselves, making sure we know our psychological profile, what's wrong with us, like what can we do to fix it, and just be really like problem and solution driven when it comes to our own being. So we're going to be looking for problems and fixating on these things. Or we could attune to an energy like self-worth and live in accordance with that. So pick a positive value and attune with it. See how both of these strategies are aimed at improvement, but one is just objectively more negative than the other. And one is objectively more positive. So tuning into flaws and self-correcting isn't necessarily negative. You can edit things from a place of love, or you can edit things from a place of feeling unworthy. It's the energy that you're approaching it with. And even though Virgo's an earth sign and earth is all about like pragmatic stuff and what's like real, what you can touch, I think that Virgo is like very, also about micro attuning. So when we are really in touch with energy, we can discern whether we are coming from a place of self-worth, for example, versus, self-criticism and trying to be perfect. Like those are subtle energies, or maybe not so subtle energies, that inform these actions that we're taking to create progress in the material world. So for more understanding of Virgo and Virgo process and Virgo psychology, tune into a podcast that I did where I interviewed Mark Jones to talk about the psychology, like a depth exploration of Virgo, as well as the Pluto and Virgo generation. So there's gems in that regardless of what generation you're part of, and I'll leave the link to that in the notes as well. So here's some announcements before we get into our week. The latest episode of my podcast, Magic of the Spheres, I interviewed astrologer Drew Levanti to talk about electional astrology, which is a kind of astrology where you work with time, you work with transits to pick specific moments in time to do certain things, like launching a project. And Drew's really good at this. It was great to talk to him about that. And we also talked about the planet Mercury and really evoked and called in that archetype in our conversation. So you can check that out, also linked below, and you can also find this on any podcast app of your choice. And then one other announcement, my Evolutionary Astrology Intensive has just started. Enrollment's closed for this current one, but I'm going to announce sooner the next one than I usually do because I want to give you some time to plan, those of you who want to make room for it in your life. And I'm also going to make the next one friendlier to European time zones, so that for those of you in England or Germany or wherever you are in Europe, that you can tune into this class at a time of day that is reasonable for you and not in the middle of the night. So stay tuned for those announcements. And the best way to stay in the know about that is to get on my mailing list. And here's our week. So on August 19th, Mercury enters Virgo at 6:30 p.m. And Mercury is going to stay in Virgo until September 5th. Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo and is at home in these signs. You should listen to that podcast with Drew because we talk about Mercury and its rulership over these two signs. But Mercury in Virgo can bring finesse to matters of clear communication, where you parcel out just the right message, discernment, and alignment. There's like a fastidious, meticulous, conscientious quality to Virgo. Alignment is a type of accuracy. So we can talk about alignment in different ways. You can talk about correct alignment when you do physical exercises to ensure, best like functional movement. We can talk about alignment spiritually, like being aligned with certain values that we have. Alignment is also, maybe if you're doing something that's a little bit more demanding of precision, like metalworking or woodworking or something, alignment comes into play with that as well. So alignment plays out in many different areas of our life. But I'm going to talk here about alignment in general as aligning with values. When we know what we are devoted to, we can use this as a center point to return to. The meditator who is focusing on their breath returns to remembering their breath when they've strayed and forgotten it. And a lot of practiced meditators, it's not like, from what I've heard, it's not that even like the most advanced meditators just get so perfect at always staying with their breath. The mind naturally strays, and the practice is about bringing it back. So alignment involves straying and coming back, or in a more loaded sense, error and perfection, making a mistake and coming back into grace. We can take it hard when we fall out of this perfection that we're trying to attain. But we can also take this to mean that alignment is not a process in which there is always perfection. It is the act of coming back to the chosen frequency that is the magic. So the more we practice, the quicker we come back, and the more naturally we inhabit the desired state in the first place. Like for me, one of my highest values is enchantment and magic. So if things aren't feeling magical or aren't feeling enchanted, I find a way to come back to it. And usually I feel like enchantment in my daily life because it's something that I've been coming back to time and time again for years. And I know what it feels like to be like, oh, things feel dull now, and like wanting them to be sparkly again. So what is it for you? What are you loyal to? And how do you come back to it as a practice? And this might be something that's really fundamental to you and you already have a lot of practice with it. And maybe it's a newer thing that you're experimenting with. And the newer it is, often the more deliberate we have to be and disciplined about coming back to that frequency, because we haven't built the neural networks or the habits yet. But luckily, I've had this intuitive understanding of like neural pathways and neural networks for many years because of just witnessing my own mind and patterns in my mind, and how easy it is to get into mental grooves, and how like changing them or rerouting them takes some time, but eventually it works. So I've just been experiencing it, but then to actually read about neuroscience, it's very exciting. Like this idea that our brain has this plasticity to create new networks, and we can use that to really enhance our experience in a chosen direction. So then on August 22nd, the sun enters Virgo at 8:44 a.m. Gotta love those angel numbers, especially when transits happen at them. And oh my God, it's 12:22 right as I'm talking about that. That's what I'm talking about with angel numbers. So, okay, all of the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, mark the transition of one season to the next. And we're talking about like summer, fall, winter, those kinds of seasons. With Virgo, summer is coming to an end in the Northern Hemisphere at least. And we start to prepare for this transition, regardless of where we are, in a Virgoan way, getting organized. Organization is, of course, a key Virgo concept. Many of us have routinely experienced this time of year being where we prepare for a school year. We like get our school materials or start to like work out our schedule. Organizing, aligning, and orienting are all relative. There's something that we are organizing ourselves with. a value that we are aligning to, or a specific event with time on the calendar that we are aligning to. There's always something that we are organizing to. Because of how our brains have evolved to protect us from danger, as I was saying, our brains are naturally wired to focus on the negative and to be vigilant, more than our brains are naturally wired to feel blissful and grateful by default. So with Virgo, we can definitely be hypervigilant and develop a fixation on the negative, like what's wrong and what needs fixing, what's not good about me, like how did I mess up this time? You know, after having like a great experience, like it was mostly positive, that one like comment or that one thing you said that you didn't feel good about after, and you're like anxiously thinking about it afterwards, like that hook that our brain has into thinking about, you know, what's negative. Maybe you recognize this capacity within yourself that you can get into a kind of reactive, unhappy loop. Once the problem is resolved, so like whatever we've been fixating and obsessing on, like I have to fix this thing, then like a hydra, like 3 other problems emerge once we've like cut off the head of like the dragon or whatever a hydra is. And so the solution does not necessarily lie in fixing all these problems that we're obsessed with, but reorienting the type of reality that we are aligning to. When we live in anxiety, we're just always going to find something to be anxious about. If you think about anxiety as an energy, when we feed it, it just keeps growing and there's more shit to be anxious about. So if we choose to live in peace or trust and build that as a habit, which is going to take some conscientiousness and self-accuracy and whatnot, it's just a practice, then we can tend to experience a more miraculous universe. And we have to really experiment with this to figure it out. Sometimes we fall out of alignment with it. Like we have this like magical flow going and we associate that magic with our circumstances that are particularly good. And then when those circumstances change, we go back into some old habits. But a lot of these, you know, teachings about brain rewiring or manifestation or creating your own reality really emphasize that the frequency that we tune into and the vibration that we hold is going to magnetize certain circumstances toward us. And, you know, this reality is complex, so we're not just these like necessarily these like gods, like, you know, manifesting every single feature of our existence. Like there's a cosmos that we're in interaction with and other beings that we're in interaction with. But as far as our own experience and what's in our own agency, there's a lot that we can positively magnetize towards ourselves when we choose a certain state of being. And then paradoxically enough, entering a more aligned state of mind can help us more easily solve the problems that we were so stressed out about because we're not in so taxed a state of mind. Most people don't have to develop a practice around being more negative or being more reactive. These are like resting defaults, which unfortunately have negative and reactive returns. The practice is about cultivating happiness, positivity, or awe or gratitude, so that these mental habits can grow and become easier and easier to feel on command. The best way to find your alignment is to pick a life-enhancing value like bliss, enchantment, happiness, excitement, following your highest excitement, grace, like anything that you want to feel. And keep returning your focus to it and the cultivation of it, like the meditator breathing and coming back to their breath. This isn't about denying your true emotions, right? You can feel your feelings, but this is about building new neural pathways and making these life-enhancing decisions making life-enhancing decisions in your state of consciousness and allowing these states to then become more accessible in your everyday experience. Not only do these small positive actions compound over time, but we end up making choices from these elevated states that further anchor us into this chosen reality. So in short, Virgo can be about perfection and wanting things to be, you know, perfect. And the shadow of that is going to be hypervigilance and fixating on what's negative, though fixating on what's negative doesn't bring us to the desired state. It builds this state of angst or feeling deprived or feeling lacking. So if we're wanting to work with Virgo energy, sure, we might be aware of all these subtle little imperfections about life, but if we tune in to the chosen value that we want to call in more, then we can use Virgo's organizing capacities to further that chosen reality. And then on August 24th, Mars in 26 degrees of Aries will square Saturn retrograde in 26 degrees of Capricorn, and that's at 11:19 a.m. Pacific. We explored Mars square Pluto last week and noted that Mars is effectively squaring Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto for this whole retrograde season. So this is months that this transit is going to be in the zeitgeist. Though it's exact this week, it's going to be around for months. So if you want to kind of feel into that more and like understand this dynamic, check out last week's forecast as well, whether the video or the written version, and tune into like the Mars Pluto energy, because we're going to be here for several months. I'll leave the link to the web article in the notes. So there's quite likely a frustrating element to Mars square these Capricorn planets. It's Mars, who loves uninhibited freedom and mobility, squaring off with planets in a sign, Capricorn, related to limitations. So just that alone, it's going to be like a little bit frustrating at times. Mars Saturn can be like a person jolting up too fast in a small room, hitting their head on the ceiling, and then being really visibly irritated and angry that that just happened. The greater opportunity here is slowing down and becoming more intimately aware of the nature of a challenge or impasse, finding wisdom through reflection. Because the Capricorn energy can collaborate with Aries. It's kind of like the structure or the embedded wisdom in Capricorn, and then this adventurous, heroic energy of Aries. And of course, those clash like every generation too. There's a sense of how things have been done, Capricorn, and the new that wants to emerge and kind of like butts heads with the establishment or the order of things as they are. So that's one way that Capricorn Aries can play out. There's ways that Capricorn and Aries can have like a supportive dynamic with each other too. And of course, their friction. So at a basic level, yes, we can be frustrated with our circumstances or the limitations within our reality. But this is a time for experimenting with new strategies and making choices that empower our sense of agency when it comes to cultivating our own destiny. So the Mars-Saturn square, it's going to be first quarter phase. And the first quarter phase is all about experimentation, testing ourselves against reality, trying new things, making choices and seeing what happens. It has a little bit of a trial and error energy because we're dealing with novel issues, like novel conflict. And so we can't exactly know like what's going to work because we're in a new situation. So tune into where that energy is in your life, where you could kind of take a leap and try something new, but you don't have a reference point for how it's going to go because it's so new. We'll come back to that. There's also some wisdom here in that the fastest track anywhere might not be the best one. Sometimes the limitations that we experience aren't just against us, but they might actually be for us. Imagine if some notably less mature dreams of yours that you had in the past had come true just because you wanted them to. And now you look back and you're like, so glad that they didn't. But imagine that they did. But they didn't. And you learned a lot of important things along the way and discovered more important priorities, right? So we have these limitations, not just in our reality, but in ourselves. Like there's just information that we don't know, or perspective or wisdom that we don't have yet. And there can be a sense of like really wanting something to go a certain way at this moment in time. Like we're in a tunnel vision with it, but then years down the road, we're like, wow, of course it's good that things didn't pan out that way, even though I wanted them to. So that's not to say that a wall or a limitation is a is automatically there to tell you that you're on the wrong path. Sometimes we experience challenges because they are there to help us. So it's more contemplative to really tune into, why am I facing these struggles in my life? Like, what am I supposed to get from this? How am I growing? How am I learning? And is this a wall that I need to be engaging with? Can I walk around it? Because sometimes we do make things harder for ourselves than we need to. It's really not a clear-cut answer. It's something that involves contemplation and going inward, but also, due to this transit, making some unique new choices. Inhibition and courage are notable themes right now. Saturn in Capricorn is cautious, and Mars in Aries, not so much. Some inhibitions are wise, and others are just fearful. Fearful of the unknown, fearful of making a mistake, fearful of looking ridiculous. And Aries is good at looking ridiculous. Sometimes we find ourselves at the impasse of really not knowing the consequence of a choice we want to make. Will it work out? Will it be successful? But we also have to ask ourselves if we're willing to live with the consequences of not having taken risks in life either. You feel the gridlock between these two? Like, it's like, yes, try something new. And there's like Saturn being kind of like cautious. So if we do decide to be courageous, we can get in contact with the facilitation and supportive energies of Saturn. People say affirmations for a reason, you know, like it creates a certain level of familiarity or comfort within a chosen vibration from which we can step out into the world with. Every place we have a fear or a resistance can be a place to tap into a wiser, more expansive, more loving version of yourself who would have something to say to encourage and coach you. And then on August 25th, Mercury in 10 degrees of Virgo will trine Uranus retrograde in 10 degrees of Taurus at 8:18 a.m. We've already spoken of alignment with Mercury in Virgo, but considering here that Uranus is related to the higher mind, the soul's memories of all its past lives, whether this enters conscious register or not, the Akashic records, so all information that ever was, ever will be, brilliance, all ideas, past, present, future, ever possible. The question now is, what radio station of consciousness are you attuning to? I like to think about, you know, if an idea comes into my mind, that it exists somewhere, like in some parallel universe, that this reality is actually that infinite, and that the ideas that we have exist somewhere in some corner of the universe. So I'm extravagant like that in my thinking, but you can also tune into like particular stations of consciousness. So if you want to feel into like the bliss channel or something, it's like that channel exists. The capacity to tune into it is kind of like a bridge that you build within yourself and your inner mapping to that state of mind. And that's the effort, you know, but then when you find the channel, it's like a wellspring. We live far too reductively if we assume that the state of consciousness that we are in, or that the experience we are having is just that objectively at face value. We are always tuned into frequencies and states of consciousness that influence our moods, choices, and circumstances. If we can mentally detach from the appearances of life enough to not take them as all that there is, we can tap into what we'd like to create. So give yourself some space to back up from the circumstances and appearances of life and tune into what station or stations you would like to be dialed into. Work with that frequency and see if the appearances and circumstances of your life shift. Sometimes we get immediate feedback, like we're getting like a good job, keep going. And other times these things compound over time. And then Venus in 17 degrees of Cancer will oppose Jupiter retrograde in 17 degrees of Capricorn that same day at 3:26 p.m. And there may be some restoration brought to crestfallen, disillusioned, or broken, quote, broken places with this transit. But not so simply. There's some thoughts I have to elaborate on this. So there's a kind of love that reaches into broken places. This can happen internally when we decide to or discover how to offer grace to parts of ourselves that we have refused to love. We can care for ourselves in a way that we have not before. And you can do this for your current self, you know, like there's those parts of ourselves that we just don't afford a lot of love to because we actively judge them or even hate them or something. So when we have this kind of epiphany or this embodied epiphany to be able to love that, like that's a really graceful moment. There's also the kind that can happen in retrospect, like I've taken to, like, if I get a memory of a past version of myself, like she's like frozen in a moment of time or she's distraught, you know, then I'll talk to her and like soothe her back in time, because at that moment in time, I didn't have the hindsight that I have now. So I talked about this on social media some weeks back about opening up a cosmic fractal chain of hindsight, where if you would like your future version of yourself to guide you now, then don't be so stingy. Guide a past version of yourself that, you know, so what if it's in the past? Like you can, in this moment in time, send love back. And if you are woo at all, and I hope that you are if you're here, I mean, come on. But if you're into energy work or something like that, you know that healing your past self can actually impact, you know, who you are now. So that can be a place that we do that. There might be some kind of retrospective energy coming in this week related to this. And then in relationship, giving and offering love to places in another where they have not felt loved, or we have not felt loved, can be immensely healing and bonding. But it can also be a place with a lot of power dynamics and unconscious motivations like rescue or savior stuff getting played out. So this may sound kind of judgmental, but I'm gonna drop it. Sometimes unresolved feelings of neediness or unworthiness can take on the mask of being a provider. Like, I'll take care of you, nothing you could ever say would turn me away from you, you can tell me anything, you can be vulnerable with me. Those statements are not necessarily bad. I'm talking about the motivation that they're coming from. In these cases, if the person is needy or feeling unworthy, and they feel like they're getting something out of another person's need, like hooking into another person's pain points and being like, I accept you, you're safe with me, feels kind of icky. Someone with healthier attachment and a strong sense of self-worth might exhibit deeply similar behaviors, like being trustworthy with sensitive information and making themselves available to be with another person's vulnerability and to accept and love them. The difference is that as they provide emotional care, they aren't motivated by lack or possessiveness, but by love, loyalty, and respect. So being needy, like being in a needy state of mind, is a very hard place to be. And I know from experience, I've definitely had, you know, I can experience neediness. I've had seasons of my life that have felt more needy, and part of why I've turned to personal development so much. So when we are coming from that place of intense lack or need, some of the ways that we interact with people are just naturally prone to be more manipulative because we feel like we have to get something, you know? So there's a kind of transformation, like a moral transformation, and also like a healing process that may need to occur, unfold if we're in that kind of state. So when I was looking at Venus in Cancer opposite Jupiter in Capricorn, I just felt into a little bit of that, like, yes, like love into broken places. And that can be really beautiful and really profound. And it can also have that kind of power balance dynamic as well. And there's a quality with Venus-Jupiter contacts of like big love, expansive love, having a big heart, having a lot of love to give. when it comes to these themes above that I've been talking about, it can be a kind of love that sees past limitations. It is these moments within ourselves where we overcome our resistance to loving a part of ourselves, because it's like we see our value more clearly, the clouds have parted and the sun has come out. In relationship, it is hearing someone's fear, insecurity, and just loving them so much more than that, that it's almost sweet and cute that they're hung up on a thing like that. Like you just envelop them with a bigger love, right? And maybe you've had that experience too. It's like, it's precious. It's like, that's what you're worried about. Like, it's okay. That kind of energy. Speaking of alignment, as we've been talking about this whole time, big love can be aligned with too. You can imagine how your higher self loves you or how source loves you and draw that self-love to yourself. I really like to read like channeled books, channeled texts, like the Sanaya Roman series are one of my favorites because you can feel that like cosmic love in the book and it creates a transmission as you read it. And early experiments with expansive love tend to relate to poor boundaries. So once we've learned that lesson and we don't want to repeat it again, and I say that because, I mean, even from experience, my own early lessons around learning boundaries, I wouldn't take that back. Like I learned what I needed to learn. So there's like the ardor of like the romantic heart that's just like, you know, almost like teenage or, you know, just like doesn't care, like, let's be together. Like that energy has its value in its time and place. So let's say that that's like something that you're past, but you still have this like big love in your heart. We can imagine a kind of big love that is discerning and self-valuing enough to make healthy choices. And I think that this goes beyond like black and white thinking or being reductionistic and just really allowing the maturity of our love nature to grow with time, and yet to keep it open and not let it get crusty because we've had experiences that might jade us. And I think that actually working through some of those cynicism things and opening again makes the heart even bigger. Of course, it's always beautiful to remember that the heart is a muscle and that muscles break a little bit to get stronger. The fibers do, at least if I'm correct on that. I'm like, I need to study muscle more or like anatomy more to know what I'm talking about, but I think you catch my metaphor. I think it translates. I'm going to stop my share here and just invite you again to like this video, to comment, let me know what resonated with you, and that if you are interested in working with me, you can go to my website and book a reading. And also if you're interested in longer term one-to-one mentorship, I have some spaces available for that. And you can email me at sabrina@monarchastrology.com to set up a free consultation. So mentorship is working with your natal chart over an extended period of time and working through some goals you have or processes that you're actively working with where you'd really like to deepen your self-inquiry with an astrologer over time. So thank you so much for being here this week, and I look forward to seeing you here again. I hope that you have a beautiful week and feel the sense of aligning to something that you really value and feeling the enhancing quality of that attunement. All right, have a great week.